The brochure called it harmonious living. I called it a place where my neighbor's wind chimes don't sound like a prelude to a stabbing. For the first 6 months, we were both right. After cashing out of a small tech firm I'd helped build from the garage up, all I wanted was quiet. Not the dead, unnerving quiet of the deep country, but the gentle, humming quiet of well-maintained suburbia. A place where the biggest drama was whose turn it was to host the book club. I found it in Serenity Peaks. A ridiculous name, sure, but the houses were solid, the lawns were green, and the internet was fiber optic. I bought the best lot, 12 Aspen Court, tucked away at the very end of a perfect cul-de-sac. It was my suburban fortress of solitude, and it had a secret weapon, a feature that made my practical engineer's heart sing a little song of joy every time I looked at it. At the edge of my property line, discreetly tucked behind a mature azalea bush, was a simple 12-foot wide chain-link gate. It wasn't pretty, but it was beautiful. It opened onto a gravel service road that the town used. Its sole purpose, its entire glorious reason for being, was to grant winter access to the municipal snowplows. While other streets in the development had to wait for the plows to painstakingly navigate tight corners and dead ends, our cul-de-sac was first on the list. The big municipal truck would roll down the service road, swing open my gate, and clear the entire court in a single, elegant 10-minute pass. It was the pinnacle of civil engineering efficiency, a monument to common sense. Leaning back in my new Adirondack chair that fine October afternoon, a cold IPA sweating in my hand, I surveyed my domain. The air smelled of distant wood smoke and freshly mulched leaves. The gentle whump-whump of a neighbor's kid practicing tennis serves was the only sound. I had made it. I had achieved peak tranquility. Then I checked the mail. Tucked between a coupon for discount gutter cleaning and a Pottery Barn catalog, whose sheer weight threatened to sprain my wrist, was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. The paper felt thick, expensive, and somehow smug. In the top left corner, embossed in an elegant, swirly font, were the words, Serenity Peaks Homeowners Association. Below that, Office of the President, Architectural and Beautification Committee. My tranquility developed a nervous tic. I slit it open. The paper inside was even thicker, and it smelled faintly of lavender and condescension. The font was the kind of cursive that looks like it's judging you for not owning more throw pillows. Dear resident of 12 Aspen Court, it began. In a continuous effort to enhance the contiguous aesthetic flow and elevate the visual narrative of our esteemed community, the Architectural and Beautification Committee has voted unanimously to address a long-standing point of visual disruption in your sector. I had to read that sentence 3 times. It was like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. Visual disruption? The only thing disrupting my visuals was the garish pink flamingo someone had planted 2 houses down, a clear violation of subsection C, paragraph 4 of the lawn ornament bylaws. Not that I had the page memorized or anything. The committee has determined that the unsightly industrial access point located at the rear of your property is a significant detractor from the naturalistic harmony we strive to cultivate. Therefore, please be advised that this gate is scheduled for permanent decommissioning and landscape integration on or about November 18th. In its place, we will be installing a lovely privacy-enhancing line of HOA-approved Canadian hemlocks. We are confident this vital improvement will be a source of pride for the entire cul-de-sac for years to come. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, Brenda Millhouse, President, Serenity Peaks HOA A and B Committee. I stared at the letter. Decommissioning? Landscape integration? Visual narrative? It was a gate. A simple, functional, glorious gate. And this woman, this Brenda, was going to replace it with a bunch of glorified Christmas trees. I let out a short, sharp laugh. A mistake. Clearly, this was a hilarious clerical error made by someone who got a thesaurus for their birthday and was determined to get their money's worth. Feeling the smug satisfaction of a man about to deploy unassailable logic, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. "Office of the President," a clipped, cool voice answered. "Hi, Brenda. This is Frank from 12 Aspen Court," I said, keeping my tone light and friendly. "I think there's been a bit of a mix-up with this letter about my service gate." "Oh, there's no mix-up, Frank," she replied. Her voice was like dry ice, smoky and cold. "We're all very excited to be finally addressing that ghastly chain-link monstrosity. It's been a blight on the community's character for far too long." The friendliness in my voice curdled. "Blight? Brenda, that's the Snowplow gate. The town uses it to clear our street. It's an emergency access route." A sigh slithered through the phone, a sound of profound and weary disappointment, as if I'd just confessed to eating soup with a fork. "Frank," she said, drawing my name out like it was a piece of lint she was picking off a cashmere sweater. "The town will simply have to find a more aesthetically pleasing route. Their large, noisy vehicles are terribly disruptive to the pre-winter tranquility of the neighborhood. I've already sent them a letter of suggestion." My jaw hung open. She sent the town a letter of suggestion? As if the Department of Public Works was going to redesign their entire snow removal strategy based on a strongly worded letter about aesthetics from a woman who probably thought beige was a personality trait. "Brenda," I said, my voice losing its filter. "You can't be serious. That gate is the only reason this cul-de-sac doesn't get buried until April. It's a matter of safety." "Safety is a matter of perspective," she retorted, her voice hardening. "My perspective is that our property values are being jeopardized by a piece of industrial scrap metal that belongs in a salvage yard. The hemlocks will be a vast improvement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a committee meeting to prepare for. We're discussing the mandatory implementation of wicker effect composite material for all refuse receptacles." Before I could ask what fresh hell that was, the line went dead. She'd hung up on me. I stood there in my kitchen, the lavender-scented letter trembling in my hand. My fortress of solitude had been breached. The harmonious living was over. The battle for the gate had begun. My first call was to my ace in the hole, my winter warrior, my personal saint of snow removal. "Avalanche annihilators!" a gravelly voice barked into the phone. "Dave speakin'." "Dave, it's Frank at 12 Aspen." "Frankie boy, how's the quiet life? Getting ready for the white stuff?" Big Dave Pulaski was a man who communicated primarily in joyful shouts and the smell of diesel. He and his crew at Avalanche Annihilators had been contracted by the town for years, and he treated his fleet of plows and loaders with the same reverence a king treats his crown jewels. "That's what I'm calling about, Dave. My HOA is trying to get rid of the access gate at the back of my property." The silence on the other end was heavy. "Say that again?" "They're calling it an unsightly industrial access point, and they want to plant trees in front of it." A sound came through the phone, a low rumble that I recognized as the beginning of a Big Dave laugh. It started in his belly and worked its way up until it exploded out of him, a booming cackle that probably rattled the windows in his truck. "Are you kidding me? Trees? Frankie, without that gate, your little cul-de-sac is the last stop on the Maybe Tomorrow Express. My big rigs can't get in and out of there without a 30-point turn that'd take till spring. We'd have to use the little pickup plow, and that thing couldn't clear a driveway after a heavy frost." "That's what I told them. They don't care. The president, this Brenda woman, said she sent the town a letter of suggestion for a more aesthetically pleasing route." Dave's laughter died, replaced by a low whistle. "Oh, she's one of those, a suggester. Listen, Frankie, You tell that lady that suggestion ain't gonna mean squat when her harmonious living is buried under 3 feet of snow and she needs a paramedic. That gate is a designated route. Period. He paused. Well, hey, let me know when you want me to just, remove whatever's in the way. The boys would love a good landscaping project. The seed was planted. I thanked Dave, his words a comforting balm of sanity on my frayed nerves. Armed with this expert testimony, I prepared for the monthly HOA meeting, like a lawyer preparing for the Supreme Court. I put together a slick, concise PowerPoint presentation. I had maps with the town's official snow route highlighted in yellow. I had photos of the gate being used during last year's blizzard. I had printed copies of the town's emergency access ordinance. I was a walking, talking, binder-carrying vessel of pure, unassailable logic. I was an idiot. The meeting was held in Brenda's garage. It was less a garage and more a sterile, white operating room for vehicles. The concrete floor was painted with a gray epoxy so clean I could have eaten off it. Pegboards lined the walls, with the outlines of tools neatly drawn behind every hammer and wrench, none of which looked like they had ever been touched. Brenda sat at a folding table, flanked by her chief sycophant, a woman with a nervous smile and a pearl necklace named Susan. Across from me sat timid Tom from down the street, a man whose spine appeared to be made of cooked pasta. He avoided my gaze, staring intently at a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. Next on the agenda, Brenda announced, her voice echoing slightly in the pristine space, is Frank's appeal regarding the Hemlock Initiative. That was my cue. I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector she had set up, and launched into my presentation. I was clear. I was concise. I was reasonable. I explained the logistics, the safety concerns, the official town designation. I felt confident, righteous even. I finished with a flourish, showing the final slide, a picture of a fire truck. In a real emergency, I said, my voice resonating with sincerity. Minutes matter. This isn't about aesthetics. It's about access. I sat down, expecting a round of thoughtful nods, perhaps even an apology. Instead, Brenda smiled a tight, thin smile. Thank you for that passionate display, Frank, she said, as if I'd just done a dramatic reading of my teenage poetry. Very vivid. However, the bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your home, clearly state in Section 14B that all property perimeters must maintain a consistent and natural appearance. Metal fencing is strictly prohibited, except for, and I quote, decorative wrought iron elements under 36 inches in height. It's not a fence, it's a gate, I sputtered. It's a utility. Sycophant Susan leaned forward, her pearls clinking softly. The clanging, Brenda. I've said it before. The clanging is so jarring when the wind blows. It doesn't clang, I said through gritted teeth. It's secured. My garbage can lids make more noise than that gate. Brenda's eyes lit up. Excellent point, Frank. That brings us to our next item, your refuse receptacles. I've noticed they are the standard municipal issue black plastic. We are voting this evening to mandate a uniform wicker effect composite material for all receptacles to better blend with the earth-toned palette of the community. She looked around the garage. Now, all in favor of proceeding with the Hemlock Initiative as planned? Susan's hand shot up. Tom, after a brief, agonized glance at me, slowly raised his hand about halfway, as if hoping no one would notice. Brenda beamed. Motion carries. Wonderful. Now about those garbage cans. I sat there, stunned into silence by the sheer, weaponized stupidity of it all. As the meeting concluded, Tom shuffled past me, giving me a weak, apologetic shrug. I walked out of that sterile garage and into the crisp night air, the smell of lavender replaced by the scent of coming war. Logic had failed. Reason had been voted down. It was time to get petty. A week later, a brand new, rust-proof padlock the size of a dinner roll appeared on the gate. It was a beautiful piece of hardware, a master lock magnum, probably rated to withstand a small bomb. Attached to the chain link with a zip tie was a laminated sign, printed in the same judgmental font as the letter, "Property of Serenity Peaks HOA. Do not tamper. Violators will be fined." I looked at the lock. I looked at the sign. I went into my garage, a sacred space cluttered with the glorious detritus of actual work, and retrieved a 24-inch bolt cutter. There are two kinds of problems in this world. Problems you can solve with applied physics, and problems that aren't really problems. This was the first kind. Brenda, unfortunately, was the second. Snip! The shackle of the $50 lock parted with a satisfying crack. I left the two halves of the lock hanging on the knob of Brenda's front door. Tucked into the handle was a simple, anonymous note, written on a plain white index card. "Fixed it for you." That single snip kicked off the great Aspen Court Cold War. 2 days later, a new lock appeared. This one was bigger, a shrouded shackle monstrosity that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. It came with a new, more aggressive sign. "This is your final warning. Tampering is a violation punishable by a $200 fine." Final warning? That was cute. I went back to my garage, bypassed the bolt cutters, and emerged with my trusty 4.5-inch angle grinder and a fresh cutting wheel. At precisely 7:01 a.m. the next morning, the earliest time construction noise was permitted by the bylaws, I treated the neighborhood to a 3-minute concert of shrieking metal and a spectacular shower of orange sparks. I left the smoldering, bisected corpse of the second lock on her doorstep, this time with a copy of the HOA bylaws with the 7 a.m. noise ordinance circled in red marker. The $200 fine arrived in my mailbox the next day. I responded by sending the HOA a professionally printed invoice via certified mail. Emergency access, maintenance services, invoice #001 for services rendered in clearing an illegal obstruction from a designated public safety route. Labor, one homeowner at $250 per hour, $250. Please remit payment within 30 days. Then I went on the offensive. If Brenda was going to wield the Book of Bylaws as a weapon, I would show her I was a much better student of the scripture. I downloaded all 247 pages of the Serenity Peaks covenants and restrictions and read them cover to cover. It was a journey into the heart of suburban darkness, a masterpiece of micromanagement, and it was my new playbook. At 8 a.m. on Saturday, I filed my first official complaint. Violation of Section 8D, Lawn and Turf Maintenance. The grass located at 7 Aspen Court, Brenda's house, currently measures between 3.25 and 3.5 inches in height, exceeding the 3-inch maximum mandated by the community charter. Photographic evidence attached. On Sunday, I filed another. Violation of Section 11A, Seasonal and Holiday Decor. The autumnal gourd display located on the front porch of 7 Aspen Court contains a warty goblin gourd whose gourd-to-wart ratio clearly exceeds the 25% warty surface area limitation for non-spherical decorative produce. This type of gourd is also not on the pre-approved list of 14 acceptable squash varietals. Photographic evidence attached. My masterpiece came on Monday, after I noticed the slight wobble of her mailbox. Violation of Section 3C, Mail Receptacle Stability. The primary mail receptacle at 7 Aspen Court exhibits a foundational instability greater than the 2-degree angular deviation permitted. This poses a potential hazard to postal carriers and disrupts the vertical uniformity of the streetscape. Video evidence attached. Each complaint was filed digitally through the official HOA portal which meant Brenda, as president, was legally obligated to receive, review, and address it. I imagined her, morning after morning, opening her email to find a new, meticulously documented report of her own infractions. The neighborhood grew tense. I'd see her glaring at her own lawn, a measuring tape in hand. I got a few more nervous shrugs from Tom and a death glare from sycophant Susan at the community mailbox. I was starting to enjoy myself, but I knew it was just the prelude. The main event was coming. I was so focused on the bylaws, I almost missed the real turning point. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find a gleaming white truck parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. The logo on the side read, Le Jardinier Elegant, Bespoke Horticultural Design. Oh no, a team of painfully hip landscapers in matching khaki jumpsuits were unloading a row of dense, 6-foot-tall Canadian hemlocks. Their foreman, a man with a sharp goatee and a palpable sense of his own importance, was directing the operation with dramatic hand gestures, as if conducting a symphony. I walked over, my heart sinking into my steel-toed boots. "You can't plant those there," I said, my voice flat. The foreman, whose name tag read Jean-Pierre, turned and gave me a look of pity. "Ah, but we must, monsieur," he said, his accent a bizarre mix of French and Southern California. "It is a canvas, you see, and my client, La Présidente, has commissioned a masterpiece of defensive horticulture, a living wall that will breathe with the natural contours of the land. It's a fire and emergency access route," I said, feeling my blood pressure spike. "It is a bold statement against the tyranny of the industrial aesthetic," he sniffed, turning back to his crew. "Deeper, boys. We want the root balls to feel truly grounded." I stood there, helpless, and watched them work. They planted the trees so close together they formed a solid green wall. They mulched the base with dark, fragrant cedar. And then, as the ultimate insult, they installed a small, polished bronze plaque on a nearby rock. It read, "Brenda's Grove, a gift to the community, autumn." That evening, an email from Brenda landed in every inbox in Serenity Peaks. The subject was, "A beautiful new beginning," and it contained a professionally shot, artfully filtered photo of her grove. She had CC'd me, of course. The A-plot had just taken a very dark turn. A few days later, so did the weather. The news started talking about it in hushed, serious tones. A polar vortex was colliding with a Pineapple Express moisture stream. They threw around terms like bomb cyclone and historic weather event. The local weatherman, a cheerful guy named Skip, started looking genuinely worried on camera. They were forecasting over 30 inches of snow, winds gusting to 50 miles per hour, and widespread power outages. The governor declared a state of emergency for the entire region, effective in 24 hours. This was it. The moment the gate went from a personal feud to a public safety crisis. Armed with a fresh sense of righteous fury, I printed out the governor's emergency declaration, which explicitly stated that blocking designated snow routes was a finable offense. I highlighted the relevant passage, marched across the street through the first few flurries of snow, and pounded on Brenda's door. "Brenda!" I yelled over the rising wind. "We need to talk! The town has declared a state of emergency. What you've done with those trees is illegal now." The interior light was on, but the door remained shut. Her voice came through the thick wood, muffled but firm. "My grove is a legally sanctioned neighborhood improvement, Frank. I will not have you harassing me on my property. Your negativity is disrupting the pre-winter tranquility. Go away or I'm calling the police for trespassing." "It's not your property, it's an easement, you lunatic!" I shouted, but I knew it was useless. I was left on her pristine porch, clutching a piece of paper that meant nothing in the face of her absolute, unshakable insanity. I walked back to my house, defeated. The snow was starting to come down harder, sticking to the pavement. The world was going quiet, hunkering down for the storm. My feud felt small and stupid, but the consequences were now very, very real. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I was in my kitchen, nursing a tumbler of whiskey and watching the blizzard begin in earnest. The wind was howling, and the snow was coming down in thick, horizontal sheets. It was hypnotic. That's when a floodlight clicked on at the end of the cul-de-sac, cutting a harsh white beam through the swirling darkness. I squinted, my heart giving a sudden hard thump. It was Brenda. She was dressed in a full, bright purple snowsuit, looking like a villain from a children's movie. And she wasn't alone. Next to her, its engine rumbling, was a small Bobcat skid-steer loader, the same one Jean-Pierre's crew had used. They must have left it for some follow-up work. With a grim, focused determination I had to, on some level, admire, Brenda climbed into the cab. The machine lurched forward. She lowered the bucket and drove it into a large pile of excess topsoil and rock left over from the landscaping project. Then, with surprising skill, she maneuvered the Bobcat over to her precious grove and dumped the entire load at the base of the hemlock trees. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as she went back and forth, scoop after scoop. She was building a wall, a solid, frozen, insurmountable berm of earth and rock, packed hard against the trees and the gate behind them. She wasn't just blocking it anymore. She wasn't just locking it. She was burying it. When the pile was at least 4 feet high and a dozen feet wide, she killed the engine. She climbed down, and for the final, theatrical touch, she waddled up the frozen mound. From the pocket of her ridiculous snowsuit, she produced a small, smug-looking garden gnome with a fishing rod. She planted it firmly on the peak of her dirt mountain, giving its little red hat a tender pat. She slid back down, gave her handiwork a satisfied nod, and marched back to her house, disappearing into the storm. I stood at the window, the whiskey forgotten in my hand. The rage I felt was cold, clear, and utterly calm. It wasn't about the bylaws anymore. It wasn't about aesthetics or property values. This was a declaration of war. She had seen the coming storm, heard the state of emergency, and her response was to build a fortress of spite. She hadn't just built a wall. She had topped it with a gnome. You don't do that unless you want a reaction. And by God, she was about to get a reaction worthy of the history books. The history book of Serenity Peaks, anyway. I took a deep breath, letting the cold fury settle in my bones. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Dave's contact for a single, dramatic beat. This was the point of no return. I pressed the screen. The phone rang twice. "Lanchers, Dave speaking." His voice was thick with sleep. "Dave, it's Frank." His voice sharpened instantly. "No kidding. What's up? First flakes are sticking good out here." "She buried it, Dave," I said, my voice low and even. "With a bobcat, piled it high with dirt and rocks." There was a moment of pure, unadulterated silence on the other end. Then came a low whistle, followed by a slow, delighted chuckle that grew into a full-bellied laugh. "She buried it? Oh, that's beautiful, Frankie. That's a work of art. You gotta give her points for commitment." "I'm giving her something else entirely," I replied. "Bring the boys. And Dave, bring the heated ones." Dave's laugh stopped. His voice dropped into a tone of solemn, professional reverence. "ETA 20 minutes. Don't start the party without us." I hung up. The 3 minutes that followed were a study in purpose. I strode to my bedroom, pulling on my thickest Carhartt overalls and a thermal shirt. I laced up my steel-toed winter boots, the ones rated for 30 below. I grabbed my heaviest jacket, the one I usually saved for ice fishing. In the kitchen, I filled a large Stanley thermos with piping hot, jet black coffee. Then I went to the garage, my sanctuary, and retrieved a high-powered contractor-grade LED floodlight on a tripod. I stepped out my back door and into the blizzard. The wind whipped at my face, but I barely felt it. I set up the floodlight at the edge of my lawn, aimed it directly at Brenda's monument to malice, and flicked it on. The scene was instantly illuminated, a brutal stage set in the swirling chaos of the storm. The war had begun. 19 minutes later, the quiet howl of the wind was joined by a new sound. It started as a low, deep rumble from down the street, a vibration I felt more in my chest than my ears. It grew steadily louder, a guttural, mechanical roar that drowned out the storm. A trio of brilliant white lights cut through the thick snowfall, sweeping across the houses. Then they turned into the cul-de-sac. They weren't just plows. They were 3 identical, top-of-the-line tracked skid steer loaders painted a matching shade of emergency orange. They were compact, powerful, and moved with an intimidating grace, their wide rubber tracks churning the rapidly deepening snow into a fine powder. These were the heated ones, Big Dave's pride and joy, his 3 horsemen of the snowpocalypse, Hellfire, Inferno, and Bernie. Dave was in the lead machine, Hellfire. He slid open the heated cab's glass door, a huge grin splitting his bearded face. He was wearing a bomber hat and gave me a jaunty salute. "Party's here!" he bellowed over the glorious din of 3 perfectly tuned diesel engines. They didn't waste a second. With the fluid precision of a special forces team, they fanned out, their floodlights turning the end of the cul-de-sac into a miniature sun. I watched, my thermos of coffee warming my hands as the ballet began. Inferno, equipped with a massive grapple attachment, moved in first. It didn't dig at the trees. It reached out, clamped its steel claws around the trunk of the first 6-foot hemlock, and simply plucked it out of the frozen ground, roots and all, like a dentist pulling a stubborn tooth. It swung the tree around and dropped it into the bed of a large dump truck that had quietly rolled up behind them. It went back for the second, and the third, and the fourth, until Brenda's Grove was nothing but a memory and a series of neat holes in the ground. Next came Bernie, with a giant bucket on the front. It attacked the mountain of dirt. With a deafening roar, it drove its bucket into the frozen earth, scooping up hundreds of pounds of rock, soil, and spite. The garden gnome, still fishing, disappeared unceremoniously into the bucket's cavernous maw on the very first pass. Scoop after scoop, Bernie devoured the wall, dumping each load into the truck with a thunderous crash. The entire man-made hill was gone in less than 10 minutes. The bronze plaque was scraped away with it. Then, for the grand finale, Dave himself moved Hellfire forward. He had swapped the grapple for a set of heavy-duty forks. I thought he was just going to unlock the gate. I was wrong. Dave was more thorough than that. He positioned the forks under the gate itself, revved the engine, and with a groan of protesting metal neatly lifted the entire 12-foot section, concrete footings and all, right out of the ground. The tyranny of the gate was over. He swung it around and gently placed it on the side of the road, a modern art sculpture titled, "Problem Solved." The path was open. Not just open. It was scoured clean. It was a beautiful, wide, welcoming avenue of pure, unadulterated access. The noise, 3 roaring skid steers, a dump truck, and the shrieks of tortured metal had finally done what my logic could not. It got Brenda's attention. Lights flicked on in every house. A window slid open, then a door flew open. Brenda came storming out of her house, a sight to behold. She was wearing a silk nightgown and a fluffy pink robe, with a ridiculously expensive-looking parka thrown hastily over it. On her feet were a pair of Ugg boots. Her hair was a mess. Her face was a mask of pure, apoplectic rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice somehow cutting through the engine noise. "You are destroying my property, my grove! I'm calling the police!" "A little late for that, Brenda," I yelled back, taking a triumphant sip of coffee. She was right about one thing. The police were coming. Red and blue lights were already flashing at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. A single cruiser navigated carefully through the snow and pulled up, its headlights illuminating the surreal scene. The car doors opened and out stepped two officers. The older one, his face a road map of weary resignation, had a name tag that read Miller. The younger one, Davis, had a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief on his face, his eyes wide as he took in the three giant machines, the dump truck, the empty space where a grove used to be, and me, calmly sipping coffee from a thermos. Brenda practically flew at them. "Officer, arrest this man!" she screamed, pointing a trembling robe-clad arm at me. "He's a vandal, a menace! He hired this demolition crew! He destroyed our community grove. He destroyed private property." Officer Miller held up a hand, his expression unchanging. He looked at the wide-open path. He looked at the massive machines, now idling quietly. He looked at me. "Ma'am, just calm down." "Sir, what exactly happened here?" This was my moment. I stepped forward, holding up the large three-ring binder I had retrieved from my house. It was tabbed, color-coded, and beautiful. "Evening, officers. Frank Miller, 12 Aspen Court," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This path is a designated town emergency snow route. I have the town ordinance right here, tab A highlighted. Miss Johnson was formally notified multiple times, both by myself and by the town, that blocking it was a public safety hazard. Here, under tab B, are copies of the letters and my certified mail receipts. She responded by illegally installing these trees, and tonight, as a blizzard which is now part of a declared state of emergency began, she used heavy machinery to build a solid wall of earth over the entire access point. Under tab C, you'll find time-stamped photos from approximately 1 hour ago." I flipped to the final tab. I was gravely concerned for the safety of my neighbors, so I hired a licensed and insured contractor to clear the illegal and dangerous obstruction in accordance with the governor's emergency declaration. Dave leaned out of Hellfire's cab, tipping his bomber hat. "Dave Pulaski, Avalanche Annihilators," he said cheerfully. "We're subcontracted by the town for emergency clearing during storm events. Just getting a head start on a known trouble spot." Officer Davis, the younger cop, turned to Brenda, his professional composure starting to crack. "Ma'am?" he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. Did you really use a bobcat to bury a gate?" Brenda sputtered. Her rage was short-circuiting against the wall of my documentation. "It wasn't a wall. It was an artistic installation. It was to protect our property values from his gate." Officer Miller sighed, a long, deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous suburban dispute he'd ever mediated. He rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't bury an emergency access route, especially not during a declared state of emergency. Frankly, we're not citing you right now as a courtesy. Go back inside." Defeated, humiliated, and speechless for the first time since I'd met her, Brenda shot me a look of pure hatred, turned, and sloshed back to her house, her pink robe trailing in the snow. Miller turned to me. He had the stern face of a cop about to give a lecture, but his eyes were betraying him. There was a glimmer of something that looked suspiciously like amusement. "Sir, you can't just hire a private army every time you have a disagreement with your neighbor." "Noted, officer," I said solemnly. He looked at my binder, then at the perfectly cleared path. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Nice binder," he muttered, almost under his breath. He and Davis got back in their cruiser and drove away. Just then, a new set of headlights appeared. It was the giant municipal salt truck, the king of the plows. The driver saw the cleared path, gave Dave a thumbs up, and swept through the cul-de-sac in a single, beautiful, efficient pass. My neighbors started to emerge, not angry at the noise, but in awe of the result. Timid Tom, standing on his porch in a bathrobe, caught my eye and gave me a triumphant two-fisted pump into the air. 2 days later, after the storm had passed and the internet was stable again, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The legend of Frank's Snowcat rebellion had already spread. Brenda was impeached in a landslide vote, her reign of terror over. I was immediately nominated for president. I turned it down flat. "I'll chair a new committee," I offered. "The Committee for Common Sense and Practicality." My nomination was unanimously approved. Our first act was to formally dissolve the Architectural and Beautification Committee. Our second was to install a set of simple, heavy-duty, removable bollards where the gate used to be, fully approved by the town, the fire department, and me. The next summer, I was back on my deck. The air was warm, the sky was blue, and the only sound was the gentle buzz of a honeybee investigating my lavender plants, a peace offering from timid Tom. All was quiet in Serenity Peaks. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave. "Farmer's Almanac says it's going to be another bad one this winter. Should I get the boys' block heaters checked?" I smiled, took a long sip of my beer, and looked out over my peaceful, orderly, and, most importantly, functional cul-de-sac. I had found my serenity, but on my own damn terms. I typed my reply. "Always, Dave. Always be ready."